Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight. My program this evening, Expedition Files, is going to delve into the world of cave diving and some of the very interesting science that we do in these environments. My name is Jill Heinerth. More people have walked on the moon than have been to some of the places my exploration has taken me right here on Earth. I swim through the veins of Mother Earth, revealing the secrets inside our planet. This is my visual studio, where I capture unique images to share with the world. Whether working with scientists discovering new species, tracking climate change, or examining our freshwater resources, I have followed the course of the Earth's water wherever it leads me. From inside Antarctic icebergs to deep underground cave systems, I have combined technology and curiosity to further our understanding of our fragile planet. As the first explorer in residence of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, I look forward to inspiring today's youth to realize the full potential that is at their fingertips. Embracing exploration, they can develop new initiatives to meet environmental, political, and social challenges of the 21st century. Creating and applying new technologies, they will carve out lives and careers along new, unexplored paths. My goal is to empower young Canadians to pursue and investigate all possibilities. We are, every one of us, explorers in residence. So my office is kind of an unusual one. Sometimes you'll find me inside an iceberg down in Antarctica using unusual life support equipment, and other times you might find me peering into holes beneath the Sahara Desert. This is an unusual place. It's actually a hypersaline lake caused by an oil drilling effort gone wrong, where they sprung into the Nubian aquifer and released water into the Sahara Desert, only to dry up and create this new hypersaline environment. So you may find me in a place like that, or you might find me in the middle of a Florida swamp, getting ready to descend beneath the surface and swim into a spring, into an underground cave system. So that's my workplace. And my office is sort of a mix of risk plus reward. Some people say that cave diving is the most dangerous endeavor, but for me there are many, many rewards. And the rewards are not just the beauty of this underwater environment, but the rewards are the things that we can learn from learning about the water planet, the part of our planet that's alive beneath our feet. So I'm just going to show you a little video of what my office looks like. Now, some of you may think of underwater caves and say, wow, that's absolutely terrifying. It's completely dark, and I don't want to go in there. But to me, these places, these portals, they're like doorways. They're doorways into the unknown. Doorways that lead to places that nobody has ever seen or documented before. Now, at times, the spaces are small, and we're literally crawling through these tiny spaces. But at other times, the caves are spaces that are as large as this room, as large as an aircraft hangar, or even in some cases, a large enough space to put this entire aquarium building inside of. Now, these environments are also beautiful. These are museums of natural history. They're the vessels and cultural depositories of past civilizations. And so there is so much that we can learn about these beautiful places. So when I think about my office and where I get to go to work every day, I kind of pinch myself because I'm doing exactly what I love. So my job requires a combination of kind of left brain and right brain. It's a combination of taking care of advanced life support and operating advanced camera systems. So it's art plus life support. And you might be surprised to learn that my educational background is actually in fine arts. So I have a deep curiosity for so many different sciences, but really my official training in life is in art. And that's why I carry these ridiculous cameras into these crazy places so that I can bring back images to share with other people. So why caves? Why would anyone want to explore caves? You know, for me as a child, I liked small spaces. I was that kid that built a fort inside the cupboard or maybe on the top shelf in the closet, and I love those cozy, tiny spaces. And as a child in the Niagara Escarpment, we used to crawl through caves and crevices, and I thought that was a really neat environment. But the first time that I got to swim into the doorway of a cave and surface inside a cave environment, I was just blown away. To be able to move three-dimensionally through these spaces with just an inhalation of your breath was like flying. But for me, the thing that drives me to explore caves today is the very fact that I am swimming inside the veins of Mother Earth. If you imagine Mother Earth as this living body, then I'm inside these arteries, in the lifeblood, the fresh water that is coursing through the planet, moving at high speed inside of these tunnels. So these pipelines that I'm swimming in are providing the water for you, for humanity, for our agriculture, for industry, for everything that we do in life. And quite frankly, water is the most important issue of this century. We're actually at a point on our Earth where obviously we're kind of overpopulated, and water is becoming a desperate situation. If we can't provide a clean drinking water supply for all of humanity, then we're going to live in a world of conflict. So the more that we can learn about these environments, the better that we'll be able to protect them, and the better we'll be able to connect humanity with their responsibility for keeping them clean. Now, I spend part of my life as a US citizen as well as a Canadian citizen, so may I apologize for my half-time home. This is actually the greatest challenge of our next century, so I just didn't want to miss that. But most of the time, I get to work with much more enlightened individuals in many different areas of science, and it's very exciting to me. So I work a lot with biologists because most people don't think of the planet as a living being, but there are living animals that live in between the grains of sand beneath your feet. There are living animals swimming through these cave systems that I explore on a daily basis. And some of them have very, very remarkable traits. So this animal, if we look at it here, you can tell it has absolutely no pigment. And if you look closely, it also has no eyes. And the reason for that is because he lives his entire life cycle inside the darkness of a cave. So there's really absolutely no point for him having any color to show off because nobody's going to see him. And there's no point having any eyes because it's completely black. Yet this animal is so perfectly evolved that he has not evolved in 65 million years. We can find the same animal in the fossil record as the ones that are swimming through the caves today. So what can that teach us about evolution and survival? Certainly something. This is one of my favorite cave animals, and he's a crustacean called remipede. Also, no pigment and no eyes, but he has these remarkable fangs. He can attack something 40 times his size and inject venom into his prey and turn the inside of that thing into jello so that he can literally suck the life out of it over time. So that's the vampire of the cave system. Now here's a blind albino crayfish, and you can actually see through his carapace. Again, no eyes and no pigment, and quite a beautiful animal. And you might be familiar with crayfish that live in the river, so that would be his close neighbor. And that little guy in the left-hand corner is just a typical river crayfish that lives, probably a couple hundred meters from the guy inside the cave. What's amazing is that the river crayfish has a longevity of 2 to 3 years. The cave-adapted crayfish can live 200 years. So that's probably some, well-advanced grandfather you could be looking at there. And I think that's just amazing. Here are my remipede friends swimming in some sample jars. And these are actually 2 different species of remipedes. Whoops, the video just paused, but the ones in the lower, in the left and right vials, even though they're laying on their back, they're just fine. I call them the couch potato remipedes. And they just lay on their back and they move their legs so that the flow comes across their body until the food gets to their mouth and they just go, done. Whereas the guy in the center that was swimming around a moment ago is a great hunter. So different species, but very, very similar animals. And again, these are dinosaurs. I mean, these things are in the fossil record that predates the extinction of the dinosaurs. So they haven't needed to evolve, and I think that's incredible. I also work with geophysicists and chemists who are interested in what we find in caves. In this particular cave in the Bahamas, in Abaco, they're very interested in the orange and the red color that you see. And we don't see this color in very many caves. And so we first wondered, what is this? So we used a very advanced sampling device, a turkey baster, in order to suck up some of this red-colored layers of stuff. So it turns out this is dust from the Sahara Desert. The reason why that's remarkable is that this cave is in the Bahamas. So it's on the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean. But during very dry epochs on planet Earth, that Sahara dust would get sucked up into the atmosphere, blown across the Atlantic Ocean, fall down on the Bahama Islands. And when these caves were dry at lower ocean levels, the rain would carry this very fine particulate in between the grains of sand and deposit it within the caves. So that enabled us to look closely at these sediments and determine, in fact, how old these caves were. So what we're able to do is find very large formations that are based on a bedrock that we could guarantee the age of. And we actually take out a specimen so that it can be sliced and we can count back in the rings of growth, much like you would count the rings in a tree. And by counting back in those rings of growth, we can find layers of this Sahara dust that tell us about these dry epochs. And in this particular cave in the Bahamas that this style came from, we counted back some 350,000 years through 3 different dry periods within the cave. So it's quite a fantastic cave. Fortunately, because of all the work of various scientists within Dan's cave in Abaco, and this work was done by Peter Swart from the University of Miami, this is now a protected blue hole region, and we're hoping to increase the protection status for the whole region and help the Bahamians to increase that geographic footprint of the protected area. Because all of this is happening beneath the ground, so everything on top of that has to be protected too. So these caves are beautiful. The formations are absolutely stunning, and they have so many stories that they can tell us. But I can't help but also just be stopped by the sheer beauty of some of these places. Now, I also work with global climate change scientists in places like Bermuda on a project with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. We were asked to do some very deep dives, in fact, the deepest man dives that had ever been done off of Bermuda's bank and off of the Challenger and Argus seamounts nearby. And their question to us was, could we find either deep caves or could we find evidence of former sea level stands deep off of this volcanic atoll? So there were actually 3 progressive years of study leading up to our big dives there. And obviously these dives took a lot of equipment. We were diving as deep as 460 feet deep. So we use an apparatus called a rebreather, and that allows us to recirculate every exhaled breath. So a traditional scuba tank, for those in the room that aren't divers, every breath that you inhale is then expelled as bubbles into the water column. But with a rebreather, you're really working with a device that's the same thing an astronaut would use to do a spacewalk. So instead of making bubbles, we recapture every bit of that gas. We scrub the carbon dioxide out of it, inject a little bit more oxygen, and we allow the diver and the machine to work together to mix the optimum gas mix for a deep dive and for the return to the surface in as timely a manner as possible. So it's a lot of equipment. For me, it meant all of this plus all of the camera equipment as well, so that I could document the science team, one scientist at a time, either taking geology samples or biology samples, things that, although we collected them back in 2011, are still being studied at the Bermuda Museum for Natural History today. They've still got a lot of samples to process. This spot here where Dr. Tom Iliff is resting is actually one of the sea level notches that goes a long way around the Bermuda Bank. And this particular one is 370 feet deep, meaning that the ocean levels were likely right there, 370 feet lower than they are today. Now, that same equipment has allowed me to go to other crazy places like to Antarctica. And in Antarctica, we were diving inside the largest piece of ice that ever calved away from the Antarctic continent. So these days, if you look on the internet, you'll probably see a lot of reporting about the Pine Island Glacier and how very large chunks of ice are coming off of Antarctica from that ice shelf. Well, for us, we were going down to the Ross Sea to intercept what was called B-15. And at the time, this Jamaica-sized piece of ice was the largest moving object on the planet, and perhaps an early portent to global climate change. So let me show you a short video about what that looks like inside an iceberg.
In the spring of 2000, the largest moving object ever seen on our planet began its voyage north. One rectangle of ice, the size of Connecticut. Scientists called it Godzilla. So large it could supply fresh water to a continent the size of the United States for a year. A special team from the National Geographic Society and the New England Aquarium will be the first to employ a bold, new technological approach at exploring below, above, and within the ice. They will follow in the footsteps of early explorers, traversing the most violent seas on the planet. The journey will take weeks. The success of their plan depends on advanced diving technologies, never before used in Antarctica. Technology that could be too good. It will take them to the edge of human endurance, but that's where the wonders are. Seeing things for the first time is a thrill that rode with all explorers, but here, science is the winner. Experiments will gather new life forms and trace currents around the ice. It's the ice that is king. How long can they stay before it won't let them go? Racing against the season, Shackleton comes to mind. They are down to a few precious days before the sea turns solid. Is it enough time? Godzilla, the largest iceberg in history. It's one thing to reach it by air, but the secrets are inside. That's where they must go. Their attempts to explore lead them to a new, undiscovered world. New technology will get them further inside a floating giant than ever before. The question is, how will they get out?
So fortunately, we did get out, obviously. Now, back on this side of the world, I work with a lot of archaeologists and paleontologists. So yes, that's a human skull that we're holding there. That's actually the skull of a Lucayan Indian in the Bahamas. So this cave in Andros is called Stargate, which is kind of neat. And Stargate and Sanctuary Caves on Andros have quite a few skulls of Lucayan Indians and other interesting, burial artifacts like burial canoes and things that have been recovered. Now, we know very little about the Lucayan Indians, and there's not a lot of conservation money available. Yet, this particular skull we were asked to bring up for paleontologists at the Bahamas Museum for Natural History. And what we would do is very, very carefully recover this sort of from the peat that it's lying in, put it in a really glamorous Rubbermaid container, and gently bring it back to the surface in the water that it has been in since the time it was first probably thrown off of that cliff into the water. But even when that is removed from the water, it instantly begins to deteriorate. And so all along we have known that we needed to find better ways to study these kinds of rare and precious artifacts, ways that were better and ways that were cheaper. And that's some of what I want to share with you today. Now, here's a typical site in Mexico where at the very top of the frame, that bright light is actually a hole in the ceiling. That's actually a drinking water well. The line down the center of the photograph is a pipe. And so there's a man up top, out of frame there, just pumping all day long the water from inside this place. It's called a cenote. He pumps the water up the pipe into a trough to feed his cattle. Now, it's a very, very dry part of the Yucatan Peninsula, and we were interested in rappelling down here and having a look inside and asked the local caretakers of the land if that would be possible. And they said, I don't know why you'd want to do it, but go for it. But what we were interested in is this mound of debris directly beneath the hole in the ceiling. And as you can imagine, anything that ever fell through that hole is going to be on that debris mound. But what we also knew is that during drier times on planet Earth, the water level would have been much, much lower. Perhaps even during the times of the Mayan people when they suffered from very great droughts in Mexico. So as you travel down the mound, at the top of the mound, you might find rusted buckets and things that man had discarded. And a little further down the mound, maybe the remains of some livestock. And a little bit further down the mound, you can find Spanish colonial water-carrying vessels and other pottery. And a little bit further down the mound, we've found some ceremonial vessels, things that may have been used as sort of funeral or beseeching the water gods to bring water to people in the area. So we find unique things like this. But here's a hint as to what's coming. This is not a photograph. This is actually a scan. So this is a 3-dimensional scan to 80,000 data points per square inch. And we can print a replica of an artifact that we actually scanned beneath the water. This, in fact, was printed in 3 dimensions and then very carefully packaged up into a beautiful pelican case by my colleague Corey Jaskolski, the person that wrote the software for doing all of this work. He packaged it up in a beautiful pelican case and he took it to the boardroom in National Geographic because he told them he had a presentation to make. And he put on his nitrile gloves and he opened up the pelican case and he pulled out this pot and said, "Look at what my friends let me bring back from Mexico." And at that point, the Board of Governors sitting there in National Geographic went, "What have you done?" Because that would break every rule of archaeology, removing precious cultural artifacts. And I told them he missed his opportunity because some of the archaeologists were starting to look at this 3D printed replica thinking it was real. I said, at that point, you should have tossed it to them and dropped it on the floor. But it did the trick. They were impressed with the possibilities. So we could scan an artifact, print it, and deliver it to museums all around the world so they could show it to people, and it looks as good as the real thing. But we can also send people the data so that no longer do we have to remove some precious artifact that could then start to decay. We can scan it and give people the next best thing, and we can also create digital virtual museums for even more people to enjoy. We started just about a year ago doing some of this work in Cuba because Cuba's another place that's very economically challenged. They have incredibly well-educated and studied scientists in their higher education institutions, but they have no money. So anything that we might find underwater in a cave system is very unlikely to have any budget associated for conservation or removal. And most of the scientists, in fact, almost all of the scientists in Cuba, don't have the ability to go into the cave themselves. They take us to these wonderful dry cave environments where we can walk through the dry cave, and then when we get to the water, begin our descent beneath the surface, and then we can find things like this. So this is a 3D scan of an extinct sloth. And it's so rare that we wanted to scan it in situ, never touch it, and just bring the data out to send to scientists. And just from this data, at 80,000 data points per square inch, they could zoom in on a tooth and identify exactly what species that belonged to, which is now extinct. So great opportunity using new technologies. But Corey, the person that wrote all of this software and engineered the techniques that we use for scanning, also has to scan the environment around the object. So anyone that's ever played video games, you may have been working in a completely artificially generated environment, but you may also have been working with real data that's been collected from inside a space. So the cheapest sort of 360 virtual reality capture device we have is actually 12 GoPros. So on a stick, these 12 GoPros that are spaced very carefully with exact distances between each lens can create a data stream as we swim through an environment that can recreate the three-dimensional environment after we're finished. It's an absolutely unbelievable data stream to have to knit together. In fact, his computers at his home in Colorado are water chilled because they work so hard. So back in Mexico, Corey and archaeologist Guillermo de Anda have launched the Digital Preservation Project with National Geographic. And it's there where we are trying to scan as many things as we can, because we're also discovering that people are finding some of these incredible environments and they're diving in them, sometimes completely unaware that even the disturbance of silt could ruin the context of some of the archaeological finds that we have. So Corey has taken this technology one step further, and that's with this device here, the Microsoft HoloLens. So this is a beta device that hasn't been released to the world yet, but Microsoft has sent it to different people and asked them to show us what can be done with it. So let me show you what can be done with the Microsoft HoloLens. What I'm going to show you next is actually a picture of what you see if you were wearing these glasses yourself. And I'm just going to turn down the audio a tiny bit because it's not the greatest audio that comes from this device.
Recording.
I'm National Geographic fellow Corey Jaskolski, and I'm here with my friend and archaeologist Guillermo de Anda in the Yucatan of Mexico. We're outside of a cenote that we just dove in and found some artifacts in that Guillermo has discovered about 15 years ago. One of them is this Ice Age bear that you can see being projected through the Microsoft HoloLens. We actually scanned this at a previous visit here, but it gives you a good idea of the sort of things that we're actually looking at in these flooded cenotes that contain Ice Age animals, Mayan artifacts, as well as more modern things from the Spanish era. Along with this bear skull, you can see some of the other artifacts that we've scanned in different cenotes. For example, we have this cranium that we scanned in Holtun cenote near Chichen Itza. I can select it and put it on the table, and then you can see a closer view of it. One of the really cool things about these holograms is you can actually interact with them. So for example, you can say, rotate, and the cranium will start spinning around so you can see the other sides. This one has an unhealed blunt force trauma, stop, on the cranium, which might have been what killed this individual. Rotate.
So what you're looking at is not a lot different from Pokemon Go. So when I first saw these kids playing Pokemon Go and I saw people spilling out of cars in the middle of a moving roadway and doing something weird with their cell phones, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the end of humanity. And what I didn't realize at the moment was that what we're doing with kids with games like Pokemon Go is that we are training them for the next generation of what comes next with their digital experience. And it's something like this. So imagine with me right now if you wanted to learn how to repair an aircraft engine. You could either go to school for many years and go hang out in an aircraft hangar and crawl around on the inside of an aircraft for years to figure that out. Or you could go to a virtual school. In fact, right now, what we could do is put everybody in a set of those glasses, and we could project in 3 dimensions that aircraft engine hanging above me here. And I'd be able to reach up and take it apart for you and show you piece by piece how to fix that aircraft engine. So it's devices like this that are going to be the future of education, the future of our entertainment, and even our daily lives. Virtual reality, if you've ever put on a virtual reality headset, can make your stomach feel like you're on a roller coaster, or can make you feel dizzy and you need to sit down. But this augmented reality experience is something else, because you still see the whole world and everybody around you, but you see 3-dimensional objects projected into that environment to supplement your experience. And when you think of the possibilities for that, it's really mind-blowing. And in the course of creating a digital museum, we'll be able to have people wandering around through a space like an open hall and experience objects, move them, interact with them, but experience them as a group so that everybody can stand around it as they would if it was physically in the room with them. So it's amazing what we'll be able to do. Now, I also work with geographers and historians who are preserving our national identity. I've been working as the expedition leader of the Expedition of the Year for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society in Newfoundland on the Bell Island shipwrecks and mine. And this is a part of Canada's history that I knew nothing about before I first visited this area in 2013. So in Newfoundland, German U-boats came in and sunk ore carriers, iron ore carriers. They also fired torpedoes on Bell Island itself and destroyed the loading wharf that would load these iron ore carriers with a very high grade of iron ore from the mines on shore. And the Germans were attempting to disrupt the flow of this ore because it was really important for shipbuilding efforts. So 4 ships went down, and today they are not just war graves, but they're also artificial reefs. Absolutely stunningly beautiful environments and fairly well intact that we can swim around. Now, we also swim around inside the Bell Island mine and have begun exploring just small pieces of what is now submerged inside that mine. And when they turned off the pumps that used to dewater that mine over 50 years ago, nobody took an inventory. Everything was just left in place the way it was when the men went home before Christmas holidays 50 years ago. And when they came back, it was full of water. So swimming through that mine and linking that with the shipwreck history is really interesting. But one of my favorite projects of all time is this project, and this is one I'm sort of most proud of because it kind of opened my mind to the possibilities of communicating about what I do. This project actually began around a campfire in 1995 when my colleague Dr. Bill Stone suggested that he could design this advanced mapping device to make the very first 3-dimensional map of a subterranean surface. And at the time, it seemed like a pretty crazy dream. But just 2 years later, Bill had built this machine and the life support that we would need to do some incredibly deep dives. Wakulla Springs is 300 feet deep, and the tunnels branch out like the branches of a tree. And Wakulla Springs is the drinking water supply for the capital of Florida, Tallahassee, as well as a huge region. It's also a very representative spring from the Floridan aquifer. But in order to dive in these caves 300 feet and go very distant into the earth, we had to come up with some really unusual technologies because our dives would be longer than had been done by anyone before. So what we did is we went to the Gulf of Mexico oil industry and we rented a bunch of equipment and created a bunch of other new equipment. So we rented barges, we rented a pressurized recompression chamber and this transfer capsule, this vertical chamber. And then we built this whole hauling structure that would allow us to raise and lower this capsule like an elevator up and down into the spring. And then when it came all the way up to the surface, it could move laterally and lock into that very large recompression chamber there so that we could keep divers pressurized and allow them to complete part of their dive mission dry. So basically the way this worked is we would go off on a very long dive, like 5 hours of bottom time at 300 feet. And then we would come back towards the entrance of the cave and start slowly decompressing. Because after a dive of that length, you have to take very, very slow steps back towards the surface, like 16 or 17 hours worth of slow steps back towards the surface. But when we finally got to somewhere between 110 and 130 feet deep, we could actually swim into this capsule after 11 or 12 hours in the water, and then we could get into this dry habitat that was pressurized, and then they could raise us up like an elevator to the surface, lock us into the chamber, and allow us to finish the mission dry. And that made a huge difference. It really increased our safety margin because it meant that some of those most critical hours of the mission, when you're really, really tired and you're very, very exposed to risk, you could be doing it inside a dry chamber rather than underwater in a place where you could drown. For that project, we developed a dual redundant rebreather system, and so that meant a lot of equipment. So by the time I'd go into the cave, I might be pulling a large abort vehicle. I'd be wearing 2 rebreathers, carrying a bunch of extra tanks, and having another scooter or the mapper that would pull me through the water. And all of that equipment could weigh as much as 250 kilograms. So a lot of gear. But fortunately, it was all neutrally balanced so that by the time you're underwater, although you're pushing an entirely huge mass of stuff through the water, you're neutrally buoyant, so you're not sinking or floating. But what made this project remarkable for me was this team here. So Brian Pease developed a tracking system that would enable him to walk over the surface of the Earth and know precisely where we were beneath the surface. So we carried an ultra-low frequency tracking beacon that would beam our location up through the Earth, and Brian could listen for us and find us. And a lot of times he got to walk through the woods in these beautifully benign locations, but at other times he had to jump in a canoe or get into a swamp full of alligators. Or at other times I've been with Brian when he tracked me under a golf course, under a bowling alley, literally underneath a lane. He's tracked me under golf courses, under a Sonny's barbecue restaurant salad bar. So you can imagine this man and a team with machetes, because they're used to chopping their way through the woods. I'm swimming underneath the Sonny's barbecue, and he bursts through the door in the Sonny's barbecue restaurant in Alachua, Florida, yelling, "Cave survey team coming through," and plants a flag in the salad bar potato salad. I think that's going to be one of my favorite moments of my career. But this kind of work is important because it allows us to pinpoint precisely where critical drinking water reservoirs or conduits lay. And in the course of our work at Wakulla Springs, it enabled us to, with certainty, show public policymakers exactly where the drinking water conduits lay. Because even show them a sketch map or a carefully surveyed map, they don't believe it. You have to give them definitive scientific proof like that shows them precisely where things are. And with that information, we were able to prevent the building of a gas station that was going to put some underground tanks directly on top of the aquifer, where a leak could have despoiled the water supply for millions of people. And all we had to do was relocate that gas station. So groundwater is so important. I mean, groundwater is the matrix that knits us all together, but it knows no boundaries. So pollution anywhere on the planet could end up being our pollution too, and that's why water is such a critical resource for us to protect. So as a child, I wanted to be an astronaut. And I didn't get to be that astronaut because at the time there was no Canadian space program. And at the time there certainly weren't any female astronauts. But this device that I got to drive through the caves in Wakulla Springs to create that first three-dimensional map in 1997 and 98 has now gone on to become what will be the next off-Earth cave explorer. So just a few months ago, Dr. Bill Stone on the left, who designed that mapper that you saw and designed the rebreather life support that we used, christened Sunfish in a cave in Florida, where we were able to take this new robot cave diver and let it make a map without us. So this Sunfish robotic cave mapper is artificially intelligent, and it's going to be able to go to places where we can't go without us. And not only is it going to do that on Earth, but it has the potential to do that in outer space as well. So let me show you a quick little video segment of how Sunfish does its work.
It's the experience of being in really, really remote places doing original exploration. It's an inspection and mapping device that will work in water.
Checklist.
It would be for things like looking at what a condition of a ship is, or an offshore tower after a hurricane, or going up a hydroelectric dam spill vent, looking at the turbines inside a hydroelectric plant, going into a cave and building a 3D model of all of the cave. Any place that you can't get to as a human, basically you give it the entrance coordinates and the depth and say, go down there, now go explore and tell me what you see. It's the first time anybody has put a robot into a 3D underwater labyrinth. It just hasn't been done. So, you know, you're seeing the cutting edge here. And that's kind of a neat place to be too.
what you're seeing right now is a low resolution of the data collection that Sunfish was able to make in real time. And it's making decisions, and it will rotate around, spin on an axis, so that it can see its whole environment, and then make decisions. When it reaches a pillar or a crossroads, it can make decisions as to which way to travel, or which way it needs to fill in the map, and then move on. And what you're seeing with this little tail is just the remainder of his tail. We've unplugged him from his tether, and he's swimming free. So the bounds for a device like this there are none. I mean, it could go to max ocean depth or into the deepest cave on Earth and bring us back a map and do so much more. And this is only the little brother. Bill Stone's devices have big brothers too. So this particular one, he's designed for an even more important mission, and that's to go map the ocean under the ice in Jupiter's moon, Europa. So imagine a frozen surface, drill a hole through the surface, and this bot goes down the hole and swims around and maps what's beneath the surface of Jupiter's moon, Europa. So I may not have gotten to be an astronaut, but I feel like I've had the next best thing, not just exploring inner Earth, but being the proving ground and the test facility for some of these things that are going to make our next big leaps off the planet. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I also want to be sure to thank the W. Garfield Weston Foundation, who's been responsible for getting me out here to the West Coast and into schools all this week, meeting kids and talking to them about exploration. And I also want to give my sincerest thanks to the Vancouver Aquarium for hosting me here today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. And I would also like to say thank you to the Canadian Geographic. They are a partner for our evening tonight. We've been working with them, and they are the ones who brought Jill here with us and helped us get everybody to come out tonight. So thank you very much to Canadian Geographic Society and Canadian Geographic CanGeo Talks. So what we'd like to do is go ahead and open it up for some questions. And right over there on the other side of the theater, we have set up a microphone. So if you'd like to ask some questions, you can just head over to that side of the theater, stand by the microphone, and we'll just take turns to ask your question. So I'd like to go ahead and get started on the question. So tell us a little bit about kind of one of the most dangerous places that you think you've been diving where you thought, oh my goodness, I'm not sure if I'm going to return from this dive today.
Oh boy. There's been a few, but I think probably the most dangerous one, the least predictable too, was inside that iceberg in Antarctica. Because ice is a continually dynamic environment, it's got its challenges beyond things that you can predict. And on one particular dive, we were literally pinned down and trapped from unbelievable current that was keeping us inside the iceberg. And a few hours after we exited that iceberg and came out, the entire iceberg exploded. So right before our eyes, the entire thing cracked and dissolved and turned into a pile of brash ice all on the surface of the ocean. And at that point, we realized it was time for us to go home. Okay, I think we have someone coming for a question.
Yeah. Jill, thanks so much. That was an amazing presentation. I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but I'm very interested in the Europa mission. Mm-hmm. I don't even think they've designed a spacecraft that can get there. The timeline is probably still decades, if not longer. So we're not going to have human divers there anytime soon, but the fact that that dive craft is under development and is so advanced is very promising. Can you speak to that, to the timeline of a mission that might be underway?
I don't know the complete timeline because it involves so many components. But I can tell you that literally since our project finished in the 90s, that vehicle's been under development. And for the last decade, Bill's been testing various iterations of it in Antarctica and Alaska and many other places. And he's ready to go.
Once again, great presentation. I'm just curious, but how did you get started in all of this? You're saying you have an arts background?
Yeah, it's a bit of a roundabout way to start a career, but I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual Communications Design, and I had a small ad agency in Toronto. I loved what I was doing, and meanwhile I was teaching scuba at night and driving every weekend out of the city to go dive in Tobermory, Ontario. And one day I just decided that I needed to find a way to do both of those things because I couldn't see my life unfolding as one inside of four walls. And it was a slow process, but if there was one nugget of truth through all of it, it's that every opportunity that I ever got started as a volunteer project. So I literally met Bill Stone at his house in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and volunteered to go on a project with him in 1995. And everything went forward from there. I was always there, the first to volunteer to organize or run something. And that's where each opportunity stemmed from.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
I had a question about your love of water. It's very apparent that you've realized over the course of your journey how valuable it is. And I guess I have two questions. So the first one is, at what point did that become apparent to you in your journey? And then the second is, do you have hope? And what gives you hope in terms of our future and our future access to fresh water?
Well, my earliest memory in life was of almost drowning. Now, that may be hard to believe, but when I was a little toddler, I crawled off the dock at the cottage and apparently was floating face down on the surface of the water in the lake, which terrified my mother, of course. I remember, though, looking at the ripples in the sand and the light coming through the water, making rainbows on the bottom, dancing on the bottom. I can remember that scene because I know I'm having that memory because the next thing I remember is my mother's navy blue sneakers with white flowing laces landing right in front of me and exploding the sand around those rainbows. So that's my first memory. So I don't know why, but that planted some seed, I suppose. The family history is that when I was picked up, I was laughing and my mother was screaming. So swimming lessons came soon after. So I guess that's part of where the seed was planted. But for me, it feels very visceral. I'm more comfortable underwater than I am on land. I am not a graceful being, and gravity is not necessarily my friend. And now your second question was?
What gives you hope in terms
what
of
gives
our
me
future?
hope? You know, really, it's the kids. When the Royal Canadian Geographical Society asked me what I wanted to do with the Office of Explorer in Residence, I said the best thing that I can do is try to be the person that I wished I had as a mentor and a role model when I was a kid. And I wanted to go into the school systems and meet these kids and inspire them to explore and help them to do things that are a little bit scary for them. And what I found with these kids is that kids are so smart today. They have a literacy that none of us have in this room in terms of their understanding of computers and the internet and their ability to collaborate globally, even if it's just through gaming. They're figuring out how to collaborate globally. So I think that the kids today, they're figuring it out, and I think they're way ahead of us, and that's what I have to put my hope in. Thanks, Tanis. Those are great
Thank you.
questions. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in, and we're live streaming this on Facebook, so we've had a question come in on Facebook, and so I just wanted to try to capture that question, and I apologize to our viewer on Facebook if I don't quite get there, but I will do my best. So what is the hopeful? I know she had just asked you a question about hope. So the question from Facebook was, what is the hopeful message that you can share for the future as the Royal Canadian Geographic Society's Explorer in Residence, and in your conversations and your visits with the school groups, what are the messages that you're sharing with the children there?
Well, to Canadians, I would say that we hit the jackpot in terms of geography. We really did. We are so fortunate, not with just the social construct of this country, but with the incredible natural resources. We have 202,000 kilometers of coastline. Over 9% of our country is actually covered with lakes. So we have an unbelievable bounty in terms of water, and we can take hope in knowing that we have this incredible resource if we can protect it. But that requires every one of us to become very connected with water, how we use it, how we might be unintentionally polluting it or overusing it so that we can protect it for that next generation. But I think that's one of the things that we can really hang our hat on, is not only do we have an incredibly exciting and dynamic country that respects science and research, and we have an opportunity to protect these amazing environments.
Thank you for your presentation, Jill. Just one question. Sorry. As our world is now very reliable, or relies very much so on fossil fuels, and we're trying to move towards a more eco-friendly planet, there's been a lot of talk on wave action energy and underwater turbines and all sorts of things revolving around the ocean. And I feel that I just want your opinion on how do you think we are actually going to be able to protect our environment if we're going to be putting all of these infrastructure into producing green energy? Is there a way to do that?
That's a great question. So we have to break our reliance with fossil fuels. There's no question on that. And we need to look to alternatives. I guess I would ask everybody to be environmental advocates. So there are people that are extremely vocal and passionate about certain topics and issues, and we need those people to wake up humanity to the issues. But ultimately, we do have to be realists. We do have to be advocates for the environment, but we have to realize we have overpopulated this planet. And we are all dependent on fossil fuels right now. There's not one of us that can say that we're, divorced from a connection with oil. And so we have to be realists. There is going to be still development. There are still going to be power plants built that might not be the cleanest things in the world, but we have to work incrementally towards a better future. So respect those that are very loud and vocal, but in the end realize that we're going to have a realistic and negotiated settlement that might not be the perfect solution, but it might be the best move for humanity. So thank you. That's a very good question.
So we have another question from our Facebook audience. So Roy is wondering how long a mapping dive from Sunfish takes.
Well, the interesting thing is that we think that within a year, Dr. Bill Stone, feels that he can have a 50-kilometer range for that Sunfish device. So it's a pretty significant swim inside the Earth. Yes.
Thank you for being here. Could you say more about the neutral buoyancy that you described and how that actually works with all the gear you have to wear?
Yeah, so imagine you've got a very large ship that will float on the surface, yet if you toss a penny into the ocean, it's going to sink right away. And that's basically because of displacement. And so we have to carefully balance every little bit of our equipment and even our own bodies. I'm a fairly buoyant body. So for me to go diving, I have to put some lead weight on my belt in order to be able to descend. So it's a balance of those two things that we bring into play so that we can be nicely neutral under the surface and don't have to fight the negative buoyancy.
Okay, we have, we'll take one last question here from our Facebook audience. A few folks here. here. So could you speak briefly on the kind of future of mixed gas diving? Like, what kinds of combinations of gases are they using now? Where is it going? And, does it have a future with robotic?
Sure. So right now, when we go deeper than what we would term recreational scuba diving, so recreational scuba divers generally use breathing air, like you're breathing in the room and it's compressed into a scuba tank. When we go deeper than 100 to 130 feet down, then we start to suffer from the nitrogen that's in that mix. We get an effect that is narcotic, and that narcotic effect obviously is not the kind of thing you want to be happening on a deep dive. So we substitute that inert gas with another inert gas like helium, and that allows us to go deeper without getting that drunk feeling. But we also have to reduce the amount of oxygen within the mix so that we don't put in too much that becomes toxic to the human body. So the rebreather is really what enables us to do that constant game of mixing gas so that it's always optimized so that we don't get drunk from narcosis, we don't end up poisoning ourselves with too much oxygen, and yet we come up with the best possible balance to get us to the surface as quickly as possible, lessening our decompression obligation. So it's really rebreathers that are the future of technical diving. Now, how that works with robotics, to this point in my career, I've mostly been the test diver that goes with the robot in case something goes wrong and the robot needs to get fetched. And the same thing with a lot of smaller ROVs and things. But really, our future, and I mean our very near future, will be using a lot more artificial intelligence in these environments. So robots that can make decisions and return home on their own.
Thank you, Jill. I find you very inspirational. I'm just wondering if you could share with us your very first cave diving experience.
Sure. Well, my first experience swimming in a cave environment was actually going into a little place called the Grotto in Tobermory, Ontario. Now, it's a really small, minimal sort of a cave. But when I finally took my cave diving training in Florida, I learned at a place called Ginny Springs. And it was a pretty remarkable environment. Now, in between those two dives, I did the stupid thing of doing some cave diving on my own without proper training. And at the time, I didn't realize that there was actually official training for cave diving, and look back on that on retrospect and say, boy, wasn't I lucky. So when you decide to embark on a cave diving training program, you really start with baby steps, just in the doorway of a cavern environment where you can still see the daylight and easily come out to the surface, and slowly move your way further through that environment, doing skills like blind exits, hanging onto the guideline, air sharing exits, line repairs, all kinds of stuff like that. But from every experience I've ever had inside of a cave, it's a very spiritual experience for me, and I realize just how fortunate I am to see a place that few people will ever experience. Thank you.
Hi, Jill. Thanks for sharing your voice with us. I'd like to know what you think is the greatest threat to your research.
Wow, the greatest threat to my research. I've taken a really different path in life, and I probably made the most money of my life as a young person with an ad agency in Toronto, and I gave that up for quite a different existence and created this hybrid career of being a writer and a photographer and a filmmaker and a speaker and a consultant and an educator and so for me, I guess the threat's always been to finding the way and finding the resources to do what I do. Because it's really hard to help people understand the kind of things that I'm interested in or that I feel are so important to study. So that's challenging. I think also throughout my career, though, there's been an awful lot of barriers for me as a woman in a very male-dominated world, not just in the diving world, but also in the underwater filmmaking world as well. And that's had its challenges along the way. But, you know, fortunately, I truly believe that anything you put your mind to, you can do. Anything that you want to do is possible if you just keep making the next best step. So it's all worked out pretty well for me. Thanks.
Hey, Jill, I want to ask one last question. So before we all leave tonight, what's the one thing that you want us to remember?
Wow. Can I give you two? So one thing, because I usually expect that people ask me, children ask me this all the time. They say, "Aren't you afraid?" And I want you all to know that I'm afraid every time I go diving, and that I only want to dive with other people who are also afraid. Because I think that's self-respect. I think that means that you care about the outcome, you care about the risk that you're taking, and you want to come home, and it's worth it. But I want you all in the room to think about embracing fear in your own lives. Because what I've learned in cave diving, I've carried into so many other things that I do in life. And I know now that little tingle of fear on the back of my neck is telling me that I'm doing something new, something that has great potential and is different and perhaps innovative. So I think that fear can guide the way for us if we embrace it. And if we don't, then we spend the rest of our lives running from it. And being a person who lives with sort of one foot in America and one foot in Canada a lot of the times, that's one of the differences that I see between these two nations, is that I feel that an awful lot of Americans are living in a place of fear, whereas Canadians, to me, have a much bigger outlook and are willing to embrace the new and the different and something that gives them that little tingling sensation. So embrace fear and think big. But the other more tangible thing that I would leave with you is to find a way to get in touch with your water resources, whether it's just learning more about your water footprint, not just, how long you leave the tap on when you brush your teeth, but how you use water in other ways in your life with the things that you buy or the things that you eat. How much water goes into making a hamburger? That sort of thing is really valuable. And also by physically embracing the water environment, take a kid to a lake or a spring and, or the aquarium here. I'm speaking to the choir because you're all here. But when people see this most magical underwater world, they'll want to protect it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jill. Thank you. So I'll do my best to reduce my 25-minute showers to 22 minutes. Oh, just kidding. I take shorter showers than that, just for the record. Okay. Thank you very much, Jill, for being here tonight. Thanks to all of you for coming here tonight. Thank you to the Canadian Geographic Society for bringing our speaker and helping us promote our event tonight and being a partner with us. I hope that you all are able to come back again to another Aquatic Cafe event here at the Vancouver Aquarium. We do have an event coming up next week on the history of fisheries. It's a 4-part lecture series over the course of the year, and it is a free event, and you can register online. So thanks again, have a good night, and we'll see you all soon. Take care. If you would like to talk with Jill in person, she will be right over here in the other gallery. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Yes, I gotta go out. Yep, that's fine. You seen Megan? I'll see her. I'll look for her. She's in a red coat. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you like that theory. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I think I would probably want that.
Good. This is our first one.
Come more often. I owe you $10, don't I, for tonight?
Sure. Oh my goodness, there we go. Wow.
I think I have exact change and everything.
Great.
Is that right? There you go.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Terry, would you mind just popping this into the donation box?